Roughly 15 miles east of Atlanta, a massive natural quartz monzonite dome juts 800 feet above a forested park.
Carved on its face are three men on horseback, Confederate President Jefferson Davis and Generals Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson.
Stone Mountain is one of the places we bring visitors. Hey, let's go to Stone Mountain.
Belinda Allen Clausell is about to hike to the top with her daughter.
My husband and I like to come fishing. My daughters and I, we like to come walking.
The town that surrounds Stone Mountain is roughly 80% black, and for the people who live in the area, this is a beloved park with trails, golf, and laser shows.
In 2021, the Stone Mountain Memorial Association agreed to install an exhibit about the park's history, including Ku Klux Klan cross burnings. Allen Clausell thinks that exhibit will go a long way.
You can't just get rid of history. You can't grow if you don't know.
Construction for the new exhibit is underway, but the Georgia division of the Sons of Confederate Veterans is suing to stop it.
The entire tenor of their proposal is an attack on the Confederacy rather than a memorial of the Confederacy.
On today's show, a look at how a Confederate group is using a state law to challenge a planned exhibit that aims to tell a broader story about Stone Mountain.
Plus, there's a new committee looking at Georgia's election laws, and we have the latest on an investigation into a Georgia lending firm whose founder is a big donor in Georgia Republican politics.
Think about it, if you just put your money into an investment and within 30 to 60 days, you think you might have lost it all.
I'm WABE politics reporter Rahul Bali.
I'm WABE politics reporter Sam Gringlas, and this is Plugged In from WABE.
So I live right near Stone Mountain Park. For my family, it's a place we regularly go to hike with our dog and meet up with other families. And this was something that you heard from a lot of folks when you visited, Sam.
Yeah, I hiked up the mountain on a recent muggy Thursday morning. A diverse cross-section of Atlanta was jogging on roads like Robert E. Lee Boulevard. And among the people I met headed up the mountain was Belinda Allen Clausell and her daughter, Gina Cornelius. Cornelius told me she tries not to pay too much attention to the Confederate carvings.
Because I can still remember coming with my dad, having our foods and snacks.
In the laser show.
Fireworks, laser show.
Celebrating America. Yeah. This is our country.
This mother and daughter are both educators, and so the idea of an exhibit telling a fuller history of Stone Mountain is really appealing.
So you can't just get rid of history. You can't grow if you don't know. And there are a lot of things that are going on now that are turning back the hands of tide.
Okay, so construction of this exhibit is underway. Tell me about the lawsuit that threatens to halt it.
This lawsuit hinges on Georgia law stipulating that Stone Mountain remain a memorial to the Confederate war dead, and that is expressly codified in Georgia law dating back to the early 2000s. Now, this happened as part of a deal to remove a Confederate Stars and Bars battle emblem that had been featured on Georgia's state flag since 1956. I spoke to Georgia Division of the Sons of Confederate Veterans spokesperson Martin O'Toole.
The entire tenor of their proposal is an attack on the Confederacy rather than a memorial of the Confederacy.
Like Gina Cornelius, O'Toole has also been coming to Stone Mountain since he was a kid, and he remembers climbing the mountain with his grandmother.
And she'd walk at a rapid pace while we kids would haul behind her.
One of O'Toole's ancestors served under Stonewall Jackson in the Georgia 14th Infantry Regiment.
The idea of a memorial is to emphasize the positive, not to accentuate the negative.
I asked what the positive was, and he said they showed courage and a willingness to sacrifice.
Okay, so let's talk about the context that the Memorial Association wants to add to this park.
The drive for a Confederate memorial on Stone Mountain dates to the early 20th century, when Civil War monuments were going up in public places around the country. The effort at Stone Mountain gained traction when the KKK relaunched during a mountaintop ceremony on Thanksgiving night in 1915, inspired by the film Birth of a Nation. That's this famous film glorifying the Reconstruction-era Klan. The Atlanta History Center's Gordon Jones says this era gave gave rise to the myth of the lost cause, which downplayed the South's fight to preserve slavery and highlighted the idea that
they may have lost the war militarily, but in fact, they were the moral victors.
But efforts to carve the memorial stalled until 1954, when, in the aftermath of the U.S. Supreme Court ruling desegregating schools in Brown v. Board of Education, future Governor Marvin Griffin campaigned for the office on a pledge to finish the memorial.
And that was part of the way that he appealed to his voters, who were very much concerned about the impact of desegregation.
And it still took nearly 20 more years to finish the carving, which was completed in 1972.
So take us to the present day again.
For park regular Kelly Clark, the climb to the top of Stone Mountain is energizing.
You get to the top, you feel like you accomplished something. You feel like you're on top of the world.
But Clark says the carving below is disturbing. She wants it removed, recalling her kids asking whether they would be welcome or safe to visit the park. She says no matter what happens to the carving, the ideas that led to its creation and preserved it for so long would not just disappear.
You can't let it consume you. It's sad, but it's not going anywhere. They move it, it's still here.
The Stone Mountain Memorial Association hopes the new exhibit will help tell a fuller story about why the carving is there. The Georgia Attorney General's office has filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit challenging the exhibit, and now the courts will decide if the plans can go forward.
Sam, thank you so much for your reporting. It was really interesting to hear about your visit to Stone Mountain. Let's take a break here. This is Plugged In from WABE.
Welcome back to Plugged In from WABE. Now to a story that involves money, political power, and a Ponzi scheme.
So Brant Frost IV is a name that many in our audience may never have heard of, but his name and the Frost name in general is something you'll hear in Republican circles. Frost's ties to Georgia politics date back to 1988 when Christian televangelist Pat Robertson ran for president. His son and daughter also hold and have held local and state Republican Party positions. The elder Frost founded and ran a lending firm down in Noonan called First Liberty Building and Loan. It suddenly shut down on June the 27th. We eventually heard from the Federal Securities and Exchange Commission alleging that First Liberty had gone from being a lending firm to an alleged Ponzi scheme costing about 300 investors $140 million.
Wow. So if you do the math there, that's an average of $500,000 a person?
Yeah, Sam. I talked to one of the investors. He wasn't willing to go on the radio, but he's out $1.3 million. Investors like this guy would invest money into First Liberty, and then First Liberty would use that money to lend to small businesses. Those small businesses would be expected to pay those loans back with interest, with the backing of future loans like Small Business Administration loans. Investors could then recoup 8 to 18% in interest, and in this guy's case, he netted $300,000 from his initial $800,000 investment. But according to the SEC, this turned into a Ponzi scheme in 2021. Some of the loans had failed. First Liberty would keep that under wraps, and to pay interest to past investors, they would use money from new investors. That's what makes this all a Ponzi scheme.
So tell me more about how this all ties to Georgia politics.
So one of the ways Frost attracted new investors was using advertising on conservative radio, popular podcasts, and online.
Hello, I'm Brant Frost with First Liberty Building and Loan. At First Liberty, we provide commercial financing for Main Street entrepreneurs to buy, build, and grow things for virtually any kind of commercial project.
The SEC alleges that Brant used investor funds for a vacation home in Maine, rare coins, jewelry, and political donations.
You talked to the federal appointed receiver whose job it is to recover money for investors.
Sam, this was such an interesting conversation. His name is Greg Hayes. And before we get into the politics, I wanted to share something interesting from our conversation. He describes what he found when he walked into the offices of First Liberty Building and Loan in Noonan.
I sit down at the CEO's desk and start looking through papers and documents and seeing what's there. I've got unopened mail, letters, correspondence from financial institutions, from banks, from credit cards that never been opened. I've got very old records in the desk drawers. I've got no current paper at all. I'm looking around the office and looking at all the file cabinets, looking for the loan files, and the loan files are in pretty poor shape. I mean, you can't really make out what's going on with the loan files. The records are sort of in shambles and just different copies of documents. It's just it's just a mess.
Hayes's first report notes almost 1,000 political donations by First Liberty and the family of Brant Frost IV using more than $1 million of investor funds. Hayes says he immediately started getting calls to return those donations.
The money's beginning to flow. So far, I've gotten about, I think it's about getting close to $60,000 that's been returned and it's really attributable to the Secretary of State asking the politicians to return the money from their campaigns, and the media bringing awareness to make certain everybody knows about it. So it's a great sign that the politicians that have this money, so they look at it as tainted funds. They don't want it, and they're turning it back. We opened a separate account to put the money in for the benefit of the investors.
So, Rahul, who are some of the people Frost donated to, and what are they doing with the money now?
So Governor Brian Kemp's campaign confirms they've returned $13,800 in donations. Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones's campaign says they're returning about $1,000. And Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger has returned $8,400 in donations. Raffensperger does play a key role in all of this, as the Secretary of State is responsible for state-level securities regulation. His office has opened an investigation and is on the search for victims as well. The SEC's action right now is just a civil action to shut down the firm. It is possible that state or federal prosecutors could eventually bring criminal charges against Frost or others.
Speaking of Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, I want to turn to elections, specifically how elections are conducted in Georgia. A state legislative committee is meeting this summer to take a broad look at Georgia election law, which has been revised again and again in recent years.
Yeah, this study committee was appointed by Republican House Speaker John Burns. It is being led by State Representative Tim Fleming, who notably is running for Secretary of State. Here's part of his opening statement.
The purpose of this committee is clear: to take a comprehensive, nonpartisan, data-driven look at how elections are conducted across the state of Georgia. We are not here to litigate past elections, but rather to prepare Georgia for the future.
Though for some, Sam, it's still about 2020 and the election conspiracy theories around Joe Biden's victory, including here in Georgia. Now, a wide range of things came up from lawmakers and public commenters, but I wanted to focus on questions and comments aimed at ERIC. Sam, this is something you've been covering a while. Remind our audience, what is ERIC?
ERIC is the Electronic Registration Information Center, and it's this multi-state collaborative that helps election officials keep voter lists updated. ERIC flags when a voter registers in another state or completes a change of address form, but the system has become a target of unfounded claims about election fraud.
Yeah, at this hearing, we heard a lot from public commenters saying Georgia should leave ERIC like other Republican states have. Lawmakers were also asking a lot of questions about ERIC. Some seem skeptical of it, but State Elections Director Blake Evans defended the system.
It is much more costly to do a state-to-state exchange and much more difficult and more time-consuming than what it is to do it through ERIC.
One more piece of audio I want to share is from Brad Carver, who's an Atlanta attorney and a key figure in the Georgia Republican Party when it comes to election and voting laws and changing them. He covered a laundry list of things that should be changed. Here's part of it.
Also advocate for reducing the amount of early voting from 3 weeks to 2 weeks. And finally, we advocate for the elimination of no excuse absentee ballots. And then aside from those positions, we all know that next year, July 1st of 2026, we have the mandate to conduct elections without the QR code. And in advocating for a way to solve that issue, we encourage you to look to the use of hand-marked paper ballots.
Big picture on that last point, activists have been skeptical of QR codes that are used on ballots. And many want to get rid of Georgia's voting machines entirely, which have also been subject to conspiracy theories.
So this idea of hand-marked paper ballots is something we've heard coming up already in the race for Secretary of State in 2026.
Yeah, let's talk more about that. Secretary of State Raffensperger has not said whether he's running for re-election in 2026. And this week, Republican activist Kelvin King, the husband of controversial state election board member Janelle King, says he's running for the office.
Yeah, King announced he was running in a James Magazine commentary and said for too long, grassroots activists and their concerns about election integrity have been sidelined. King also wrote that he supports hand-counting ballots to confirm results, a rule that was approved by the state election board last year and later blocked by the courts. Now, Janelle King, his wife, was among the 3 Republican election board members who voted for that rule and who were praised by President Donald Trump as pit bulls fighting for victory. King helped her husband campaign in 2022 when he was last on a statewide ballot and lost the GOP Senate primary to Herschel Walker, including in this video on voting rights.
Ground zero for voter suppression? I'm not suppressed. Are you suppressed?
Nope. This kind of rhetoric is not only dangerous, but flat out wrong.
Now, Rahul, you mentioned State Representative Tim Fleming is also seeking the Republican nomination. No prominent Democrats have so far gotten into the race. And Rahul, one more state election board tidbit while we're on this subject. This week, the 3 Republicans on that board voted to hire a new paralegal with no legal experience. And she is the wife of the man who until recently was the board's executive director. She was voted in over objections of the board's nonpartisan chair and lone Democrat.
So we've been talking about, Eric, the system that helps keep voter lists up to date. And right now, the state is preparing to cancel hundreds of thousands of registrations using data from that system. Sam, can you explain this to our audience?
Right. So Georgia is moving to cancel the registrations of nearly 500,000 inactive voters marked as having moved out of state or not voted for several years. The Secretary of State began sending cancellation notices to Georgia voters who were in inactive status in the 2022 and 2024 elections. That's nearly 6% of the more than 8 million registered voters in Georgia. Now, this number is so big because this is the first batch of registrations flagged by the voter maintenance tool ERIC back in 2021, and those are only now eligible for cancellation. Remember, ERIC flags when a voter registers in another state or completes a change of address form. About 100,000 registrations are subject to cancellation because the voter didn't cast a ballot or contact an election office in roughly the last decade. Voters are sent mailers when they first enter inactive status, and then after this latest mailing, they have 40 days to update their registration online, re-register, or return a postcard that comes in the mail. Now, the Stacey Abrams-founded voting rights group Fair Fight has launched a new tool to help people check their status, and have also criticized these cancellations as purges. But the Secretary of State's office says that routine maintenance is critical to keep voter lists up to date.
So this list cleaning is happening ahead of the 2026 elections when there are important races up and down the ballot, statewide offices like governor and the nationally important U.S. Senate race. Democratic U.S. Senator Jon Ossoff is running for re-election. What we don't know is who his Republican opponent will be.
But this week, we did learn that Republican Insurance Commissioner John King is ending his short bid for the Republican nomination. King was unable to score an early endorsement from Governor Brian Kemp or President Donald Trump, who have both held off on weighing in publicly as others consider getting in the race.
In a social media post, King says, quote, "It's clear there's little path forward to the nomination. Congressman Buddy Carter is now the only prominent Republican in the race. But former University of Tennessee football coach Derek Dooley, who's hired some top Kemp advisors, is moving toward getting into the race. And longtime Trump ally Congressman Mike Collins is also expected to declare soon. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reports Kemp has told King, Collins, and Carter he will not be backing them in the primary. A Collins spokesperson told me that the congressman and Kemp spoke by phone and looks forward to the governor's support after he wins the primary.
So you can kind of read between the lines there about the purpose of Kemp's call. As he said this spring, he's holding his powder dry for now.
Before we go, we wanted to talk about what's happening with WABE's funding following last week's rescission vote. I think it's helpful to explain to our audience how it all works. I get a lot of questions about how public media is funded.
Last week, Congress agreed to President Trump's request to rescind more than $9 billion in previously appropriated funding for international development and public broadcasting. That will eliminate federal support for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which helps fund PBS and NPR stations around the country. This amounts to more than $1 billion over the next 2 years. Now, many Republicans have long sought to defund public media, accusing NPR and PBS of liberal bias. The networks have pushed back against these charges and have defended their work as a vital service, especially in rural communities. Congress created the private nonprofit CPB in 1967 as part of President Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society program. Today, about 13% of WABE's budget comes from federal dollars through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. That's about $1.9 million for this fiscal year and a little bit more in the next fiscal year. 87% of WABE's budget is from the community in the form of membership, philanthropic donations, and sponsorships. Now that will need to be 100%. The national networks get a small amount of the CPB money directly, but most goes to stations like WABE, who in turn pay NPR and PBS for their programming. The cuts are essentially immediate, and so that could leave especially some smaller stations scrambling to stay on the air.
And that's it for this edition of Plugged In from WABE.
Plugged In is produced by Brendan Rivers. Our managing editor is Alex Helmick.
Plugged In is available wherever you want to listen. If you listen on demand, make sure you head over to the Plugged In feed to subscribe and leave us a rating.
You can also now find us on the radio at 90.1 every Friday morning from 9:30 to 10.
And as public media faces an uncertain funding stream, you can support this work with a gift at wabe.org/donate. I'm WABE politics reporter Rahul Bali.
I'm WABE politics reporter Sam Gringlas. We'll be back next week.